Drums for Peace here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Welcome back inside the studios of 1210, Power Talk 1210. Please go to our website, powertalk1210.com, download the free app, and be able to stream all the shows, all the local shows here. It'll be worth your while. And it's an honor to bring back in a cat who I connected with back on in the origins of this journey, back when I was trying to get the ship straightened out. The ship is on its way. It's got strong sails. It's moving forward. And I get to talk to him again. Ndugu, Chancler, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake. I'm glad to be back.
You know, Ndugu, I wanted to talk to you about going back. We talked about your upbringing. It was, I want to say it was a Creole community in Louisiana. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about when the first time is that you went into a sanctified church and your experience with the rhythms of that church. Because when I talk to guys like Stubblefield, Jabo Starks, it was not your traditional trap set. And I just wanted you to talk if in fact there was a community church and your experience in the sanctified church.
Well, yeah, there was. The first church was out in the country, out in Cotton Valley, Louisiana, with my grandmother and my mother, of course. I grew up in the church. Let me start there. I became an usher, a junior deacon, and all of that stuff. And in fact, in my early upbringings, they called me Rev because everybody thought I was going to be a preacher. But growing up in the church, in the tradition of the churches back in the South, in the country, we didn't have drums. We were lucky to have a guitar. It was piano and then organ. And every now and then you'd have a woman that would bring a tambourine.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved to California, we got in a church that definitely had organ, guitar, and piano, and a couple of women that were committed to tambourine. And when I say committed, I mean that Sandra Crouch type tambourine playing, where they held the rhythm from their seats as part of the ensemble. Still no drums. Drums came way later. I was actually playing professionally before drums got into my church and a lot of the other churches around. Because at that point, the churches were going through a battle of bringing all of that rhythm in, it not being part of God's music, because they were still playing traditional hymnals and all of those things and songs written by like Lee Dorsey.
Exactly.
And Jester Harrison and like that. So the drums in the church came later, but the rhythms, one in particular was that shuffle and then that two-beat. And then that shuffle. That was always prevalent, and you could always feel that in the phrasing, in the music, the songs, and all of that. So that was my introduction to that whole sanctified rhythm of the church.
This is fascinating. So you're telling me pre-trap set in the church, the shuffle rhythms were always still there, though. They were always there.
Oh yeah, the songs were bluesy.
Yep.
And then blues shuffles a lot of times.
It's just funny because
for example, the Ushers marched to a song called "We Are Soldiers in the Army," which was kind of like a 6/8 shuffle. We are the soldiers, don't in the army, don't. We got to fight, cha-cha. Do we have to fight? Do da 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 ti ti ti. It was that. So that's a shuffle.
I love it. Have you had?
So,
I mean, I guess it's just funny because I've interviewed. I mean, I've interviewed so many cats and a lot of drummers, and a lot of them say that my generation and younger really struggle playing shuffles and blues and just simple blues. And I wonder if it's because I want to ask you if with the evolution of music and the church becoming, again, I don't go to church, but it's like when you go into a church now, the idea of how the rhythms have changed and whether we've gotten too far away from just the blues itself, and that's why people are having a hard time just playing shuffles.
Well, we got away from the combination of the two, with no understanding of their interrelationship to each other. So yes, there are very few shuffle songs out there now. I mean, that's why when you tell a drummer nowadays play a shuffle, the first thing he does is play Rosanna by Toto.
Right.
Now,
yeah.
prior to Rosanna, you had Bernard Purdy playing and this is all halftime shuffles.
Right. Right.
But then, you go back, you had the Doobie Brothers doing minute by minute, but then you go back before that and you had Motown, you had B.B. King, you had all of that music that was based on shuffle, and all the blues players. So, yes, we've gotten so far away from it that we don't understand the relationship it has to the evolution of hip-hop and go-go and everything else.
What do you think is I guess that's one of the reasons I'm doing this show, is because I'm a non-musician. I'm just a listener. And what are the things that you try to instill, not just in your students, but, ultimately when you're out playing, that can, because you say we got you use the term, we've gotten too far away from it. People reference Toto. Toto was a late 70s, early 80s incarnation. Is it that cats don't go far enough back anymore? Is that part?
Yes.
Is that it?
That's the time span for most artists that are studying music nowadays. If they go back beyond 20 years, they're going back deep as far as they're concerned.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about the evolution of rhythm and these grooves, you haven't even touched the surface 20, 25, 30 years ago. You got to go deeper than that. For example, guys will talk about Earth, Wind, and Fire, and they won't know anything about Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Dreams in Chicago.
Right.
The only relationship they have with Chicago or Kool and the Gang is if they see them on a bill with an Earth, Wind, and Fire. But all of those bands had the incorporation of those grooves we're talking about as part of their regular groove set, and the music itself, a lot of hits were written on those rhythms. So, no, we don't go far enough back.
And and it's vexing to me, because that to me, well, let's just get to the crux of it here. I mean, can you talk about the experience playing with Thelonious Monk?
Yeah.
That's going back a little bit. Yeah.
Well, that's going back to like 72, 73.
Right.
71 maybe. Robin Kelly did a great definitive book on Thelonious Monk, and I interviewed with Robin for the book, and Robin actually jogged my memory about a whole bunch of things about that period. The thing about Thelonious Monk was, just like a lot of jazz musicians, they didn't use verbal communication a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say that, Monk never announced what tune he was playing. So the difference between playing with a Thelonious Monk and just playing in a band nowadays is you have to know the melodies of the songs. Because Monk would just start playing a melody, and we would join in. He didn't count things off. He didn't say we're getting ready to play Bench or Swing or Round Midnight. He would just start playing. You had to know the tune. Now, that made all of us have to always be ready, knowing the repertoire. Now, one of the few artists that does that today is Stevie Wonder.
Right.
Where he'll just start playing one of his songs, and you have to know it. But most bands rehearse forever, and the tune has one arrangement, one way to do it, and that's it. And you still may not know the melody because you're studying the groove. Getting back to Monk, Monk would just start playing the tune, and we'd all start playing. So that means you got to know the key, the melody, the form, and all of that, and then play it as we're going to play it as a whole new arrangement every time. Sometimes Monk would solo first, sometimes someone else would solo first. And there were all these musical cues that dictated all of that. And that's how the music was made. So with Monk, we didn't talk. I worked with Monk for 2 weeks straight, and he did not say 5 words to me the first week. Now, the second week we played, we were up in San Francisco, we had real conversations off the bandstand. He was opening up to me, and we talked about family, we talked about music, we talked about a whole bunch of things. But the first week, all he said was, he'd nod his head the first couple of days, and that was hello, and then the next few days he started saying hello, and that was it.
Right.
So you get used to nonverbal communication. You get used to musical communication, which is another one of those dying art forms.
Well, I want to get it off life support because you talked about there were other cues. Can you talk about specifically the other cues? Because we are such a verbal society now. What were the cues he used?
He would, there's an art to how you end your solo to bring someone else into their solo. In musical terms, they call it resolution. But in layman terms, it's getting out of the way. In other words, you don't fill up all of the bars to the solo till the end of the whole chorus and then expect someone to just jump in. You resolve that conversation before the end of the chorus.
Right.
That's one thing. Dynamic variation, tempo changes. Sometimes we'd be playing and he would be playing at one tempo, and then all of a sudden he'd take his left hand and use that to bring the tempo and or the dynamics to another level. All these are things that you have to pay attention to musically. That's not something you need to talk about. All you got to do is listen. You know, how are we going to end the song? Endings. You know, I've always said that there hasn't been a definitive book written on all the ways jazz musicians end tunes.
Wow.
The different cadences,
very cool.
The different ways you end the same tune. And all of that is musical communication.
Is it still applicable? Can my generation, I'm going to be 38 in 2 weeks, younger cats, are they able to understand this musically? I'm a non-musician. I just listen, and the track we're going to listen to in a minute exudes exactly what you're saying. Is this stuff that is still able to be not just heard, but embraced?
Yes. Yes. When you listen to the great players, you hear it. When you, I mean, in contemporary music, you listen to a Marcus Miller, he resolves.
Mm-hmm.
You listen to a Joshua Redman, he resolves. You listen to Roy Hargrove and Ambrose Akinamisu, they resolve. You know, they move over and they let people come in. And you can listen to them and then put on a Herbie Hancock or Wayne Shorter record, and you'll hear that same essence of how the music is approached among the players.
Do you think
it's not just that they're great players, it's that they're great players with the fundamental foundations of how the music is approached and treated.
Do you think that, because the propensity of leaders, the touring circuit, just the propensity of cats that were teaching in that fashion, all you guys picked up on that? Your entire, I mean, there were dozens of cats. I mean, we could talk about Santana, you could talk about, modal jazz, but it just seems, I mean, you mentioned some names, but is it still happening? I mean, would you say the numbers are just as high, but we don't know the cats as much because there isn't a thriving commerce-based record industry and a touring circuit? Or is it just, is it a skill that is demonstrated by less cats?
It's the elite. And when I say the elite, the musicians that have depth. Now, I'm saying that because there are a lot of musicians now that are not playing for the same reasons we played music in the beginning.
Sure.
We played music in the beginning because we wanted to make a musical statement. There are a lot of people now, they don't play music to make a musical statement. They play music to get chicks, to get some fame, and all that kind of thing. So with that, your training is going to be different. But those that have depth, those that have the fundamental training, it is always there. And you hear it in the playing. You hear that depth. One of my students asked me, he said, man, why do you like certain young new drummers and you don't like certain other ones? And I said, well, I can hear the depth, I can hear the lineage, and I can hear the amount of study that some of the young drummers have done, who they've paid respect to, who they've paid homage to, who they've studied, and all of that. And not just a guy that's assembled a bunch of licks. There's a difference, because then the music has a connection. You know, I used to talk about all the time, the guy says, man, I like the way you solo. I like the way you solo. I said, then I'll tell you what. Start with Max Roach,
right, and
work your way forward.
or Kenny Clark or something, you know? I mean, either way,
yeah.
You know, Ndugu, I got a piece of music. I have been tripping on this for a few months now, and I'm just so psyched to be able to play it for you. We have a game called Name That Tune. Settle in, and we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, brought to you by the Jewish Community Center of Southern Arizona, the Stereo Hospital, Abbott Taylor Jewelers, the Circle Tree Ranch, and Craig Pretzinger of Allstate Insurance, and we thank them for their support. All right, Ndugu, what do you think that is, brother?
My first impression was Freddie Hubbard, but I had a vision of Lawrence Killian.
You are, yeah. Well, first of all, I played you a solo from a non-leader, so that was a little unfair. That was Oscar Brashear.
Uh-huh.
And that was on an album that we've been sort of just channeling here, Hampton Hawes, Blues for Walls.
So that was me?
Ndugu, I have to tell you, this is an expensive album. I mean, it's $30. I think you can swing that. But I'm just saying, you need to get your drumming on this. There's another tune called Sun's Dance. And it's Henry the Skipper Franklin and you, Hamp Hawes, Oscar Brashear. We didn't Hadley Kalaman. I can't stop listening to this album. I cannot understand how you are keeping the rhythm on this stuff. It is so loose, but it is exactly what you described with Thelonious. And I just want you to talk about Hampton's nonverbal communication style, because this album, I don't even know if it ever got any airplay. As far as I'm concerned,
it didn't. It didn't, because I didn't recognize me being a part of that at that point. And I'm going to say, and I don't want to get off the tangent.
Yeah.
First of all, when you talk about Hampton Halls, prior to this album, if you want to talk about nonverbal communication with Hampton Halls, High in the Sky is the album to get.
Donald Bailey on drums on that, I think.
Yes,
yeah, that's right.
Leroy Vinegar, Donald Bailey, they're live. It's a trio.
Sure.
It's seamless, and they go through all of these tunes without any kind of communication. That's the first thing. Hampton was one of those, he didn't like to talk anyway. And his thing was, music is really simple. It's really music. We don't have to talk about it. So he would say, man, he'd make statements like, if we're talking about a musical concept, he'd say, don't marry it, just get close to it. Or let's go on and do this, and then you can go ahead and buy you a hot dog.
Right. I love it.
Things like that.
Yeah.
And what that means is, let's just play the music, and it'll play itself. As opposed to, we can sit here and intellectualize on it all day, and we haven't played a note.
Okay, I'm going to counter you for a minute. I'm going to push back for a minute on this, because before we went to the track, you were talking about a cat will say, hey, Ndugu, how come you like some drummers and you don't like others? And you talked about adherence to lineage, adherence to studying, and just having their own sound. But Hampton saying, don't marry it, just get close to it. Tell me about the fact that you guys, your generation, truly was up on the bandstand 6-7 nights a week, sometimes 2-3 weeks at a time. You became trusting of that philosophy. That doesn't happen anymore, because there are venues that allow live music, but it's a 2-hour gig, and it's a steakhouse, and they're playing low, and people aren't there to listen, and you're not playing 2 or 3 nights a week in some upholstered sewer or whatever. So therefore, you intellectualize everything, because that's all you do now is talk. You don't get a chance to play a lot. Please explain. Let me know if there's any validity there.
There's a lot of validity there. That goes back to the thing that we're talking about. People are playing music now for different reasons. You know, the thing about the bebop era was that was music for musicians to play. Play. It wasn't for you to have a great steak for. That was Cotton Club.
Right.
You know, to be entertained, that was the Cotton Club. For musicians to play, they took it back into the clubs and then migrated from there. But what was happening in those clubs were, we were experimenting and doing our thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that, a lot of music was developed right there in those clubs that became viable music. You know, in my working with Joe Henderson, we wrote tunes right on the bandstand. With Miles Davis, we wrote tunes right on the bandstand.
I love it.
Why? Because there was a certain avant-garde tinge of freedom that existed in the music that we expressed right there on the bandstand. And you're able to take chances when you know that you have the freedom and liberty to do so. You start to trust yourself first. Once you trust yourself, you trust everybody else around you. It's like playing, you know, it's like Stephen Curry and Golden State Warriors.
Right.
They trust each other. Everybody's not going to be on every night,
mm-hmm.
but they trust each other. And even when someone is not on, they're still playing the game at a high level. Even in playing this music, trusting each other, and everyone's not on, you're still playing at a high level.
I really want to mail you. The other album is Universe, Ham Paws, and that's that's with you and Chuck Rainey, and that's equally It just was, just so much to talk to about Ndugu. Can you talk to the audience about some challenge that you lay out for yourself in the modern era? What are you still trying to push yourself to do? You've done, I mean, people would look at your resume and say, I mean, you've been on hit records. You've played with luminaries. You've had an amazing studio career. You've played with all, I mean, you are yourself, you got a nice job. You're teaching at USC, or at least you were last time I spoke to you. What are you still challenging yourself with?
Well, two things. Well, more than two things, but I'll share a funny story with you. This week I was on the internet, and somebody sent a video out on Facebook of me playing straight ahead with Patrice and Stanley Clarke. And the quotation was, I knew he played with Michael Jackson and all of that. I didn't know he could play jazz.
Oh, man.
I never drew a line.
Right.
And I've always tried to absorb myself in the music, whatever music it is. And that's always been my goal and my mission, is to absorb myself in whatever the music is. And my contemporary goal hasn't changed from when I started playing. Service the music at hand and be a part of the change that the music is going through. And that's what I've tried to do. I still try to do that.
Even if it's, so tell me about, but I mean, even the situations that you're in, I mean, I guess when I talked to Lenny White, when he first heard Steely Dan, he said, wow, there is rock music with nice changes, and this is interesting stuff. And Lenny actually talks about now going into sessions with cats that are, a little bit kind of just what you're talking about. They don't go back far enough. They say, boy, I knew he played with Michael Jackson. I didn't know he played jazz. So they're dealing with kind of lack of depth. He's going in and kind of opening that group up a little bit and swinging a little bit. I mean, how do you embrace the music, even if the music you're playing is not? How do you help the music grow?
Look at it from this standpoint. All the great records, no matter what the genre, there were jazz musicians involved.
Right.
Okay, so there's an element of jazz called creative improvisation that makes that music get life and get different new life. So whenever I approach, I don't care what kind of music it is, I want to bring something new to the table. I want to do something different. I want to do something that'll give the music a signature, that'll just set it apart from, oh, that's just another group, blah, blah, blah. And that's my approach. What can I bring new? A hamburger's a hamburger, but if you look at any of these great chef shows nowadays, they're doing different things.
No, you nailed it. And you said music is a meal, man. Who wants to just eat chicken, right? You gotta have a
right.
You gotta have the gumbo.
That's right.
I was stunned. Great picture of you from yesteryear, around 1975. You're turning away from the drum set and just a big old Cheshire grin on your face. You're playing with Santana. How did you link up with Carlos?
How did I get with Carlos?
Yeah, how did you link up with them? Because I that was something that was off my radar for a while. I didn't realize you.
Oh, well, now that is the story of life. And it goes, you're right at the right juncture to ask that question, because you're talking about depth of the music and so forth. I was working with Alice Coltrane. And Carlos and Alice decided to do an album.
That's right.
Alice recommended me to Carlos to do a session. This is after Miles Davis. I worked with Alice, loved Alice Coltrane, loved working with Alice Coltrane, learned so much working with Alice Coltrane. They did an album. From there, Carlos called me for a couple of sessions for Santana. From there, he asked me to join the band. Now, coincidentally, when I joined Carlos Santana's band, I was on hold to go out on tour with Marvin Gaye. But
you busy schedule.
They were going to use another band to record the live album and not the touring band, so I said, I'll pass on that. I'd already played with Marvin Gaye and recorded with Marvin Gaye. So if I wasn't good enough to make a recording, I wasn't good enough to go out on the road. So Carlos called me and I joined the band. Now, I'd already worked with Willie Bobo, so I was familiar with Afro-Cuban Latin rock music, from the commercial side. So again, it's it's developing all of these tentacles for the music and letting the music service itself that gives you the luxury of being able to enjoy whatever music you're playing and do it just. See, the other part of it is not just to play it, but to do it just.
I dig, man. Ndugu, listen, I'm on a hard break. I have a lot more to get to with you. When I'm out I'm planning on being out in L.A. In June. I really would love to connect with you in person and meet you, man. I really love your point of view, and we can pick up on this conversation because I always really enjoy it.
Okay, I'd love to do that. We can sit down over a meal.
Okay.
I'll tell you that what you're speaking of now is what sparked my first and only Downbeat interview. You know, I did an interview last year for Downbeat
Sure.
with Frank Alcar, and the interview actually was at lunch, not during the live interview that we did afterwards. The interview was at lunch. We just sat down and started going through a bunch of things, and
Yeah.
that actually became the interview.
Well, actually, my whole goal on this one was just to make sure that we covered all new territory, and we got more to do. There's just so much territory, and I'm growing, man, and music is a meal. So much love to you, Ndugu, and I'll let you know when I'm heading out there. We'll find a time to grab a bite.
You got it.
All right, brother.
Let me know. I would love to.
Love always, man, and keep swinging, brother.
All right. I appreciate you, Jay.
All right, bub. Talk to you soon. We'll be right back on the Jake Feinberg Show.